Hey guys, welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God video, and for this ranking video I wanted to go over my favorite UT abilities from least favorite to most favorite, and I've actually made this template myself with every single non-vanity untiered ability in the game, and so therefore I'm gonna go ahead and rank them. Now just to remember that this is a preferential tier list, not an objective tier list. I might rank some white bags that are objectively better than others, higher or lower depending on whether or not I like them. Please don't take this the wrong way because I'm not the most experienced Braum player, and so therefore I'm not ranking them on how powerful they are, although that does play a contributing factor. It's mostly just whether I like the item or not. So let's get started. I've been getting about, pretty much decent feedback regarding my tier list videos, and I figured I can do one for every single item. I know Hayes did one 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago. Talwar, excuse me. You guys know him as Talwar or Bikiri Box 12. So I know that he's done them already, but there's a lot of new white bags that came out, and I also thought about throwing my own commentary into the mix because I'd like to believe that he and I are different in terms of our preferences as well as our just experience in the game. I think I have a little bit more experience with late game dungeons, so I don't know, we'll see how it goes. And I've also taken the liberty of organizing these in every single, if you take up this tier list template on Tier Maker, the abilities should all be ordered together, which makes it convenient for you to go to tomes, helms, then to robes, stuff like that. So let's get started. Now, I have a no opinion section here because either A, I have never seen the usage of this ability, or B, I never had the ability, and there are a couple of them here that I haven't really ever seen used, and so therefore I'm going to put them in the no opinion list, starting with Necronomicon. I know this is the second drop from the Corrupted Eye from the Curse Library, and I've never seen it used before. I know it is a tome that I think curses enemies. Let me just double check. I'm pretty sure it's the tome that curses. Yeah. See, just like looking at it, I've never really seen its effectiveness too much, and so therefore I'm putting it down here. Let's actually get all of the tomes, or all the abilities that I have never seen used. I think this one. I have never really seen the Cloak of Refraction used. I know it's a decoy cloak, but I just, like I said, I've never really seen it used. What else here? Spear God thing right here. Perennial Cranium. I think I can rate Perennial Cranium. I haven't seen this one yet. Hanagasaku maybe. And I think we can keep everything else. Now, because just like the dungeons one, there's so many of them, these won't be ordered in terms of at top of D tier to bottom D tier. It'll just be my general broad thoughts on the ability, because I think we're looking at well over maybe 50, almost 50 or so. And so I can't really form a too good of an organization on it just because, yeah, there's just too many of them to go through. Tome of the Mushroom Tribes, I actually I think it's a really interesting ability, and it's the only tome in the game that I believe allows you to provide remote healing. But from what I remember, it's not exactly the most, how do I say? It's just a little too situational, given that in Realm, players are constantly moving around. And while it does allow you to create a healing mushroom that sort of continuously regenerates players, I feel like the way you would have to use it is just a little too situational, plus the fact that I don't think it has Wizmod, and it also doesn't have any bonus stats, which priests kind of need. So I'll put it up in B tier because it has its practical uses, and it's an interesting alternative, especially if you're looking to cover more healing in terms of, let's say, positioning. So if you want to drop a couple mushrooms in a void, that could be helpful. Tome of Purification easily in S tier because of how much more prevalent crowd control is in this game once you get into the higher and later dungeons. So stuff like, okay, so for Lost Halls, you would see pretty much almost every debuff in the game. And then with the Fungal Cavern, you would only really see Confuse, maybe Slow, Exposed, Quiet, and things like that. So it wouldn't be as valuable in a Fungal, but regardless, in almost every organized run, the raid leaders would want at least 1 or 2 Puries, just for the sheer fact that the main reason people die in this game is not necessarily raw damage, but from crowd control. And so therefore having this is just it's a staple. You kind of need it. And I love Puri on my priest. I just think it's really helpful to be able to shrug off a lot of buffs, debuffs, especially Confuse. And so I'll put that up there. Tome of Pain, I had it rated as a really one of the items in my UT abilities that needed buffs. It just doesn't make sense to have a tome that deals damage, not too much damage to begin with, and it stems from the priest itself. I said if there are ways to buff it around to make it just like a Necromancer skull cast range, then that would be a lot easier to use, but it's just, a priest is not a DPS class, and even if it was meant to be a DPS class, like if you had some gimmicky build, you would probably just be better off using a different tome, just because it doesn't make that significant of a difference. It does provide you with 4 attack and 4 speed, which are very good stats to go with, but I just think there's almost no situation you would want to use it. Tome of Holy Protection. So initially, this was considered one of like the most valuable tomes in the game because armored alongside, this is the only ability alongside Helm of the Juggernaut that was like really freaking good. And while it's definitely fallen out of favor given that with the advent of Marble Seal, kind of rendering this tome completely obsolete, it's sort of one of those abilities that's just kind of gotten power crept. And so I'll probably put it down to B tier. I would normally put it as A tier, but the thing is, Tome of Holy Purification or Prot, it's only a tome that you would want to use if you're soloing as a priest, but if you're in a large group of people, chances are either the combined healing of paladins and priests around you, or a Marble Seal, which is getting increasingly more common nowadays. I actually don't have my own Marble Seal, but it's just like, almost every situation you would want a Marble Seal, there probably is one, and so therefore there's no reason to really bring a Prot with you. It's still a very good tome, right? And I would rather take a Prot over a Pyra. It's just not as good as it used to be. Still, I like it a lot, and every time I get one, you know, you can never have too many Prots, as they say. Helm of the Juggernaut, easily an S tier. Not necessarily because of the rarity of it, and obviously because it's not that valuable given that it's worth only 5 speed, but I like Juggernaut a lot just because it provides you with a different style of play as a warrior. See, what part of the main mission, or like the MO behind these UT items, is to provide you with alternative playstyles for your character or for your class. And that's where Realm expresses the most amount of creativity with customizing your build through the abilities, and the Jug does that quite well. It doesn't give warriors the same amount of speed as, you know, if they were given the speedy buff, but it does still give a decent amount of base speed, and I believe it has the same defensive stats as a Helm of the Great General or G-Gen, and so therefore you don't miss out on any extra bulk, but it gives you the armored buff. Now, what makes the Juggernaut different from the Prot is that warriors are more in the front line, and therefore they need to rely more on defensive stats. You can essentially turn into a pseudo knight, or rather, a knight that instead of stunning, just does a lot more damage, and so therefore, I would say it is quite possibly objectively the best white bag in the game, just because not only is it really rare, but it matches, the rarity matches the power, right? It's like, it's a super, super powerful item, probably even broken, and so therefore, I would consider to be one of those white bags that if you have one, you should be very proud of it. Hive Master Helm. See, this one players would probably rate very well, but the thing is with Hive Master is that I've never really used it all too much because I would just rather use a Draconic Dominance or a Jug over a Hive Master. I understand with Hive Master you can actually give Warrior, if you have like the right build, I believe it's D-Blade, Hive Master Helm, Mercy's Bane, and I think Crown, you could very easily break DPS higher than a wizard with Extreme Prejudice Staff, which is widely considered to be the highest DPS in the game. And so I understand that there's a lot of practical value to it. The bees that like swarm around you, they do quite a bit of damage, and also the red bee has a chance to inflict curse, so it's a pretty solid helm, make no mistake. It doesn't give nearly as much defense as the likes of a Jug or a G-Gen, so you're kind of making this is primarily a better DPS version of the helm, but I would prefer, because Warrior's DPS is already really good, I just feel like this is a little bit superfluous. It's only if you really want to push your Warrior to the limits, and since I don't use it too much, I have quite a few, I think I have like 5 of them. I use it for like a couple Warriors or a couple instances, but most of the time I would rather just have the added safety measure of a Jug, and so I'll put it up to A tier, just because it's definitely a great drop. It's probably better than the... Well, no, it's definitely a lot better than the Queen Stinger's Dagger in terms of if you were to compare the white bags from the Nest, so I'll put it up here. Cloak of the Planewalker. See, with rogues, I actually think rogues have been just slowly falling out of favor, or just gradually over time, because tricksters are just being more and more widely used. The thing with rogue is that while rogue has always been the kind of benchmark for a good rushing class, because a lot of players have better pets and trickster gear has been getting a lot better, it's overall not, rogues in general are just not really as good as they used to be. Oh, not rogues, cloaks, excuse me. And so therefore the Planewalker, while it used to be like a very solid mid-tier item, I actually don't think it's that valuable anymore because it gives rogues the ability to teleport and also to go stealth. But 9 times out of 10 a trickster is more widely used just because it has a much greater selection of prisms than a rogue does their cloaks. And so yeah, I just think rogue is another one of those classes that's kind of getting more and more useless as time goes on. And they're kind of in need of a rework, I think, or just some quality of life buff, since I don't really see anyone choosing to go a rogue over a trickster at all. And so I'll put it C tier. It still is valuable, right? Still is really good. It's basically a side grade to the T6 cloak if you don't have one. Bloody Surprises. Okay. It's alright, I would put it B tier, but the reason why I put it C tier, even though it has an insanely awesome sprite, is that, yeah, the attack boost you give to a rogue basically puts them better than a trickster, right, in terms of your rushing ability, but I just don't really think that the trade-off for losing speed is that great, because it has the same kind of thing, I think it has the same kind of thing as a Star of Enlightenment, where you slow yourself down, you basically lose the traits of a rogue to gain the traits of a warrior, and while it's probably a little bit more effective on a ninja, I just don't think this is too amazing of a cloak, especially that it comes from the Lost Century, and I would say it's rarer than the Jug, but the thing is because no one likes doing Lost Century, no one really cares about it, and it's not the same kind of oomph as a Jug would give you, right? And so I would say if they wanted to, they could straight just remove the slow debuff altogether and just give you the flat attack buff, but I think in that case it would just make it a straight up direct upgrade from a T6 cloak. And maybe it is, but I also consider the Jug to be a straight upgrade from a G-Gen, because Speedy's not that important, you don't really need Speedy in this game anymore. So yeah, I'd put it up a lot higher, but because it's a cloak and not something else, I don't have too good of an opinion on it. Okay, moving on to shields. Snake Skin Shield. I'll actually put it in C tier. While it's not a white bag, and it's certainly not a really good one, the reason I put it up a little higher is because it actually has a practical purpose. It is the same as a T4 shield. It gives, I think, like a little less defense, but it gives you speed, and it stuns for the exact same amount. I'm pretty sure the damage is roughly about a little bit better than a golden shield. So this is a really good early game white bag, and if I ever play a knight PPE, I'm definitely going to go for a snake skin, just because after, obviously if you get a mithril shield, it's a lot better, but a snake skin, you can't go wrong with it. It's a pretty solid item for what it's worth and how to get it, and so therefore, I think it's worth a low spot, slightly higher than D tier. I only put items in D tier if they're just subjectively bad, like if I just think they're pointlessly bad, so that's why I put it up in C tier, because it has its purpose. Spiteful Scutum, I'd say B tier. It has I have a similar sentiment towards the Scutum that I do the Mushroom Tome, is that it has a practical application, right? You basically get a lot less range and I think a slight cooldown on your cast time in exchange for a longer stun and more damage on the shield. So it's a kind of like a side grade to your standard shield. I don't really put it that much higher because, well, it's not really, how do I say? It's kind of like that shield where it's only if you really want to have a little bit more damage, because it does provide 2 attack as well. But you really just can't go wrong with the regular T6 Colossus shield, and so therefore I'll put it at B tier because it's not really that much better. I just, I mean, it's okay, but I would still just much rather like the spam ability and the wider range and area coverage of a tiered shield, or, if you were ever to get an Augmer, you would use that. So I'll put that B tier. A Crystal Shield, I'm gonna put in C tier, just because I get the gimmick behind it, and I know a lot of players actually like it. You have a chance, I believe, with max mana, and if you like to inflate it with a gemstone or something, you can go invincible for up to, I think, like 10 seconds, which is crazy. And even if you're silenced, if you casted the shield ability before getting silenced, it would still protect you. But if you get quieted, then you're basically screwed. See, the problem with Crystal Shield is that I just really don't think it matters on a knight. For a Pally, Oreo makes sense, right? But the thing with Crystal Shield is that you don't get stunned, you're slowed forever, and you also don't get any defense, which knights kind of need. And so therefore, it's not the trade-off that you get from a Crystal Shield. While you do get more invincibility than an Oreo, I just don't think it really matters given how slow you are, and also just because of the sheer fact that knights are known for their stun, not really much else. And so it's kind of also because knights are not as overpowered as they used to be, since there's a lot more true damage, there's a lot more armor breaking shots. And so I have, I think, like 3 of these shields, and I never really found the need to use it. Although I think it does have more range if you like use the actual like ability, but the damage is just so pointlessly bad that you really don't want to use it for damage either. Augmer. I'm putting it in A tier. I know what a lot of people are going to say, Augmer's the best white bag in the game. No, it's not. I actually disagree. Shield of Augmer, I like to argue, is extremely overrated. See, when it first came out, the fact that it gave 60 HP and 14 defense by base stats is ridiculously powerful, right? And it does pretty decent damage. Not to mention, it is extremely rare. It looks great. The sprite is also amazing, and it's a great flex item similar to the jug. But the power and practicality of an Augmer just doesn't really match that anymore. Reason being is because Armor Broken has no longer become a staple requirement in a lot of dungeons, since we have, first of all, we have the Poison Augmer, the Crystallized Fang Venom, which does armor breaking in a more practical way, and also a lot of abilities and items these days have been getting increasingly more and more true damage, like let's say the Quiver of Shadows, or there's another few that like give you the ability to do just piercing damage. I think the Cave Dweller Trap too. You don't need to armor break as much these days, and it's also because the amount of damage reduction that comes from enemies with defense, it's not substantial, given that there haven't been any new enemies with increasingly higher and higher defense. Like you would think a Void would have 200 defense. No, I think it only has like 50. So you don't really need an Augmer. It's helpful. Obviously it's pretty helpful, but I just don't think it's worth S tier, just because people rate it too highly by virtue of its rarity, and I think like, if I were to look at it, I would much rather consider Jug to be a lot better, even though there are 2 chances you can get a Jug from a Hermit or a Sphinx. And Augmer, while I would like one, don't get me wrong, I'd love one, I just, you know, it's not like I would much rather get a different white bag, I guess, than an Augmer. Seals, so there are 3 of them, and we have the Scholar Seal. Now, I put Scholar Seal in A tier because it is exactly what I think I would expect from a UT seal. See, Paladins have really interesting white bags. The Scholar Seal, the Seal of Blasphemous Prayer, or the Oreo, and the M Seal. All of them have very distinct functions that diverge from the Seal of Blessed Champion, or the G Cookie, which is great because that's the whole point. And the thing is, all 3 of them are good in their own aspects. The Scholar Seal in particular I rate very highly because it allows Paladins to go from a healing and damaging boosting support to a more casting support. So it supports players that have classes like, let's say, a Huntress or an Assassin, or if you're like Lava Walking, I mean, that's an edge case. But it essentially makes it so that characters who have very expensive mana costs to their abilities can benefit a lot from it. And that's awesome because it gives you the reason to want to have multiple types of Paladins in a party. You could have one Paladin that has an M Seal, you could have one Paladin that has a G Cookie, or 2 or 3. You could have one Paladin with a Scholar Seal. It allows Paladins to wear multiple hats, and I think it's a very good addition for the class. And so I also like the sprite. It looks really nice. I don't have a Scholar Seal myself, but every time you see a plus MP boost or plus wisdom boost, you know that someone has one, and so therefore it's a really awesome seal. Oreo. Put it at B tier. I don't have as good of a sentiment on it than I do a Scholar Seal. It gives you healing and damaging for the party, just like a G Cookie, but instead of giving bonus HP, it causes you to become invincible for I think up to 1.8 seconds. That's nice, but where would you want to use this? Because in Realm, there's never a situation where you have to brute force tank a boss or whatever that makes the G Cookie just so much better. I guess the best time to use a G Cookie would be to, like, if you're going a full skip void and if you're just not too confident in your abilities to tank something, or if you feel like you have to Nexus, you can use a G Cookie to face tank your way through it. Fortunately, unlike the Crystal Shield, the G Cookie doesn't give you any detrimental effects, I believe. Let me check. Is there any negative effect? No. So the G Cookie doesn't have any negative effects except it has -4 defense on the passive stat bonus. And that's fine. But there are very fringe uses for an Oreo that I don't think is too practical. It's just a side, like I said, it's one of those like gimmick items similar to the Scutum where you really don't need it. It helps whenever it needs to help, but you can probably just get by with the G Cookie, so put it B tier. M Seal, S tier. One of the best. See, if you noticed, all the S tier, this looks so bad actually. All the S tier abilities are white. Anyways, Marble Seal has a similar kind of benefit component to a Puri where you almost need it. It gives everyone armored. It gives everyone a jug, basically, jug defense. And in high level dungeons where there's a lot of damage coming towards you that you can't really tank for long periods of time, like the Crystal Cavern, Lost Halls, the Marble Colossus, or even if you're full skipping, stuff like that, it just is such a valuable item and it provides so much value to the player. And just like the Scholar Seal, I love the sprite. I just think the seals are just super cool looking, even the Oreo. I have never gotten a Marble Seal. That's also why I rate it so highly, is because I haven't gotten one yet and I really want one. I have, I think, let's see, 9 Kalo Swords, 5 breastplates, and 4 potatoes. I have no M Seals. I've never gotten one before. And while Paladin is not my favorite class in the game, I just really want one. Like, it's just that one that I never have been able to get. And its value is certainly quite effective. Some people did bring up the argument that M Seal could be overrated, especially when going up against bosses that do a lot of true damage. But even so, the fact that it gives armored and it doesn't remove damaging, you still need to have a G Cookie, right? Like, it's not a replacement because the extra regeneration and max HP is important. But for an M Seal, it still gives everyone both offensive and defensive stats that they pretty much can't live without. And so therefore I put M Seal pretty high up there. Bottled Metazoan, I'll put it C tier because I get what it's trying to do. It allows you to spawn essentially a pulsating poison that does damage every specific interval, and I think it does a decent amount of damage. It's a good side grade, right? And it has kind of the same thing as like actually no, you know what? I'll put it at B tier because similar to the Oreo, similar to the Tome or Mushroom Tribe, similar to the Scutum, it's a side grade. It's something you want to use if you want an alternative to a standard poison, although I still think a standard poison is more effective because I'm pretty sure, does the Bottled Metazoan ignore defense? Because that's the main staple trademark of the poison, is that it does true damage. If it does, let me know in the comment section below please, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't. A lot of bosses these days, like the Wasp Queen, Marble Colossus, and the Void, they move around a lot, and so the Metazoan doesn't have as practical of an application similar to the Mushroom Tribe Tome, that it needs the enemy to stand stationary. And while there are instances where the Marble Colossus is stationary, or I guess the most important case to be the Crystal from Crystal Cavern, it has its uses, and therefore I'm putting it at B tier. I like the sprite. It looks kind of like a bottle of jelly or something. It's like a little jellyfish inside, so I like it. I just never had one, and I don't think it would be as desirable of a poison than like the likes of a different poison. Plague Poison. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to put it at D tier. It's... see, back then, it probably would have been a C tier item, and I get that it's supposed to be a poison that sacrifices damage and speed in exchange for recovering a huge area. But we don't really need that much area, especially in Realm, because Realm has become a lot more fast-paced, right? There's the Steamroll meta we're in right now, and Plague Poison I think is just an infinitely inferior version of a regular tiered poison, because the amount of time it takes for Plague Poison to run its course, in that time, with reasonable magic heal on a pet, you could throw in the same amount of tiered poisons and just get the job done a lot faster. And most of the time, there aren't enough enemies to where you would want to throw a Plague Poison to cover that large of an area. A regular tiered poison kind of does the job just fine. And so therefore, I put it at D tier. I just think there's no instances where you would want to use a Plague Poison. It initially was considered a really good poison back like a long time ago when damage wasn't as inflated as it is now. But yeah, it's just kind of fallen out of favor. Murky Toxin, I'll probably put B tier. I like its concept. It allows you to throw 2 different poisons with shorter radiuses than an original poison, but it does a lot more damage. It also has very good offensive stats of +3 attack and +3 dex. I'm pretty sure the tiered poisons had Wisdom. So you're getting a lot more DPS from a Murky Toxin than you would a Bane Serpent. And so I'll put it at B tier. I never had a Murky Toxin myself, and I do like the sprite though. I actually like the sprites for all of the poisons because they're just really cool looking. I don't know why, I just like them. Similar to the seals. And so I'll put it at B tier. I think it's a pretty respectable poison. Nothing too great about it, but nothing wrong with it either. Crystallized Fang Venom, I'll put it A tier. This is a very coveted white for any assassin player. An armor-breaking poison, it makes perfect sense. A corrosive acid kind of that like melts through any kind of defense a target might have. It gives you, similar to the Murky Toxin, instead of 3 dex and 3 attack, it gives you 4 dex and 4 attack, so you get even more damage. And there's no drawback to it. Before, it actually armor broke the assassin, whoever was casting it, but they removed that to now it has no detrimental effects to use it. Has the same mana cost as a Bane Serpent. I think it's a slightly longer throw time, so you gotta time it a bit better, but overall it's just a really, really solid upgrade to tiered poisons. And I would argue that almost every situation you're in, a Crystallized Fang Venom is probably better than a Bane Serpent unless someone else has an Augmer. This is like such a much more practical use to inflict armor broken than an Augmer, and so I'll put it alongside there. Plus, also, it's pretty rare. I mean, I myself have gotten, I think, 3 of them, but I have very strange luck when it comes to event gods, where I have so many whites from this group of event gods and I have none from another group. Like, I don't have a Conflict, I don't have an Oreo, I don't have an Augmer, but I have 2 jugs, I have 3 of these, I have like 6 tablets, I'm not even joking. I have so many tablets that it's just, I have a very strange relationship, I guess, with my white bags in terms of event gods. But yeah, A tier poison, I was very happy to get it, and when I found out that it armor broke, I was ecstatic. Cracked Crystal Skull is kind of like the same thing as that. Actually, no, you know what, I'll put it in C tier because it has the same exact property as a Crystal Shield, where it's good for where you would need it at that point in time in terms of your progression. And so yeah, I think it's a pretty solid UT ability. It's very common, so you can get them whenever you want to if you're ever playing a PvE Necromancer or if you're just starting out. The Forbidden Jungle has a great Necromancer set with the staff and the skull, and it gets the job done until you need a better one later, so I put it C tier. On the other hand, the Sealed Crystal Skull, despite being an upgrade of the Cracked Crystal Skull, where you get it from, and also just if you're doing a bunch of thickets and getting this, I would argue that this is the worst white bag of the thickets, and that's a pretty big insult to it given that the white bags from thicket aren't really that great to begin with, and I just think it desperately needs a buff. See, funny enough, these 3 abilities were all in my what UT abilities need buffs video, and I think for good reason I put them in D tier just because there's almost never a situation you would want to use any of these 3 abilities compared to just those standard tiered abilities of that category, or its counterparts, like if its fellow peers. Like, why would you ever use a Tome of Pain over a Puri? Something like that. And the Sealed Crystal Skull unfortunately falls into that category. Perennial Cranium, I've not really seen one used too frequently, but I would put it in C tier just because I think, actually, you know what, maybe I'll put it in B tier. So it has kind of the exact same properties as a Metazoan, as a Mushroom Tribes, where it creates a stationary plant that like pulsates like damage over time. And the reason why I put it in B tier, even though I don't see too many Necromancers using it, is because where it's practical, it can actually be quite beneficial. It's like a hybrid of the Metazoan's damage and the Mushroom Tribe's healing. And so therefore I'll put it at B tier. Never gotten one before, I don't think. Is this the one that, yeah, Belladonna. Belladonna's Garden I don't think is a dungeon I would ever want to go into. But it's not a bad white either, and so I kind of like the skull too. It's like a plant growing inside it. It's a pretty cool sprite. Skullish Remains of Aspen, also another B-tiered item. A skull that trades in damage in exchange for being able to slow. Not bad, right? Like, actually, then in that case, I'll probably put Aspen at A tier. See, I don't use Aspen Skull all too much just because I don't really, like, I have a bunch of other skulls. I have the Endless Torment and the Corrupted Skull, so I would always use these skulls over an Aspen Skull. But looking at it, it's basically just a skull that has slightly less damage and slightly less base stats in exchange for the ability to AoE slow, and that could be extremely helpful on a Necromancer. So I'll put it up in A tier. Maybe I should probably start using it myself then, after like looking at it. I'm not too big a fan of the skull. It's basically the head of the head of Aspen, which is kind of disturbing, but I mean, not that Necromancers were very, I guess, virtuous classes to begin with. But yeah, so I'll put it in A tier. I think it has a pretty solid purpose, just like the Fang Venom and the Scholar Seal, and so I'll put it over here. I probably am rating this just by pure objective value and not so much my own sentiment on it, because I have quite a few. I think I have like 3 of them, but I don't use them all too much, but I think upon looking at it, maybe I should start using it. The Corrupted Soul Skull, I would probably put A tier, not S tier. So it's a skull that allows you to curse enemies, which increases the Necromancer's DPS. Pretty good. The only downside is that it deals less damage at base and it has a smaller radius. So while it does curse enemies, there's just a lot of cursing going around to begin with just mystics being able to curse in general. And so I don't think curse is as powerful of a bonus component, similar to the Hive Master, although the Hive Master does quite a bit of damage. So that's why, I don't know, I'll put it around the same level as the Hive Master and the Skull Remains of Aspen, just A tier, where you can't go wrong with it, right? It's not a bad skull by any means. It's pretty good. I just don't think it's something that I would consider too powerful to be S tier. In fact, none of the Necromancer skulls I really consider to be S tier. They all have very creative effects, right? Similar to the Paladin, but none of them where I'm just like, I really need to use it, right? It's just not really that kind of, it doesn't give that kind of like amazing wow factor, right? Similar to the Endless Torment, I love the sprite. The sprite looks great. In fact, I would put it A tier just to the sprite. The sprite looks awesome. It's like an inverted color version of a sealed crystal skull. But the problem is, there's very few situations where you would actually get the purity effect. I know you have to hit only 2 enemies to purify yourself, which is easy to do, but most bosses that you fight, there's only one entity anyway, and so therefore you almost never have the chance to gain the purification effect, and so therefore I feel like this is a lot of wasted potential. If they made it just a little bit easier, or instead of making it so like, or make it so that the targets that you would need to hit to purify any status effects can be decreased with Wizmod. I feel like that would make it a lot more usable, because then you would just make this a pure Puri skull. It would just be a Puri skull. Of course, there's landscaping going on again. It's not as loud as the previous videos, I'm pretty sure. I'm looking at Audacity right now. It doesn't look too loud, but I'm sure you can definitely hear it. So I'll try to find a way to lower it. Of course, it's summertime. There's lawnmowers going on nonstop every day anyway, so... Alright, moving on to the traps. The video is getting quite long, so if I haven't already split it into a part 2, then we'll probably be in part 2 because it's at 40 minutes, which means part 1 be about half an hour and part 2 be another half hour. Got quite a few more to go. I have a lot to say with every single weapon. The problem with my unscripted videos is that I tend to ramble a lot, and therefore it gets a lot longer than it needs to. I can probably sum up my sentiments for each of these abilities in like 5 words, but yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'll try to be quicker.